Welcome to the Cook's Now Mate. Today, a British classic, chicken and mushroom pie. Now every part of the recipe today is homemade, including the pastry, the rough puff on top, the short crust base. But if you don't want to make the pastry, by all means buy it, buy a roll of short crust, buy a roll of puff, and then just follow the recipe, because my video of making the pastries will be separate. They won't be part of this video. But they'll be part of the series, so those who want to make the pastries can then check those videos out to make them. So the chicken and mushroom pie that I make is, the dish itself is a traditional dish, and the English have been making this pie for centuries. But the way we're going to make it is not going to be traditional, for the simple reason that we know better these days. We know more about cooking these days. And I'm all about taste, flavor, enhancing, making the food the best it can be without veering too much away from the taste. So this isn't going to be my version of a chicken and mushroom pie where, I start throwing in some crazy herbs and whatever and saying how great it is. No, this will be a chicken and mushroom pie. Whoever's going to have it is going to say, wow, this is a great chicken and mushroom pie. They're not going to say, oh, it's something different. But the way I'm going to make it is going to be different from the traditional method. The traditional method is quite basic, and you throw everything into a pan, put your pastry top, and throw it in the oven. And there's nothing wrong with it. Clearly it was a good recipe to have lasted all these centuries, but I know it can be better, and that's what this is about. Now, I always make my chicken and mushroom pie once I've got leftover meat from a roast. But if you want to make the dish specifically, just take 300-400 grams of chicken meat, whether that's thigh or breast, whatever, cut it up into little pieces that you want to have in the pie, and put it on the hob in a saucepan with a couple of 100 mils of milk, and then just cook the chicken through. Then take the chicken out, leaving the milk behind, and put it into a separate bowl. So then we would both be at this stage now of the cooking process. The other thing we need is 300 grams of mushrooms, which I have chopped up quite thickly. The reason is, mushrooms, when we cook them, will shrink, and the smaller we make them, they'll shrink to nothing, and we don't want that. It's a chicken and mushroom pie. We want the chicken and the mushroom to be very evident in this. The next very common ingredient usually in a chicken and mushroom pie is onion, which we're going to dice quite small and cook in butter. But what we're also going to do is add the sweet flavor of leek. I just think it's a great addition to this pie. Just one leek, and it will be very subtle, but it will really bring up the flavor of this chicken and mushroom pie. The next ingredient is garlic, not a traditional ingredient in chicken and mushroom pie, and I'm sure purists are going to slate me for it. But I'm not about being a purist. I'm talking about making the best version of what this can be. And garlic is one of nature's little gifts that just improves the flavor of anything you put it in. Well, almost anything. I wouldn't put it in a cheesecake, but it will improve and enhance. There's not enough garlic here for this to become garlicky. The pie will not be garlicky. Just adding 2 cloves will just bring it up, so that again, when someone tries it, they'll just go, wow, this is a great chicken and mushroom pie. They're not going to say it's a great chicken, mushroom, garlic pie. It's not going to be garlicky. So you're definitely going to need it. And the other thing that I always add, again, nature's enhancement to food, is bacon. This is smoked streaky bacon, as we call it in the UK, because it's quite fatty. And this we're going to render, we're going to cook in a pan and render it to get its fat out, but we're going to dice it very, very small. This is not a chicken, mushroom, bacon pie. The bacon will not be obvious to anyone who's going to have this. The bacon, like the garlic, is just going to up the savory, up the deliciousness of this dish. Okay, so we take out bacon, and the first thing we want to do is start cutting it into small little pieces. Okay, and what we have now is strips. So what I like to do is just run the knife the other way, put that into a bowl. Next thing we want to do is chop up our leek, take the end piece off, Then I run a knife down the middle. And then we slice. Once we've sliced up our leeks, it's very important that we wash them, because within each layer, I guess it's how the plant grows, it can trap some dirt and some grime. So I'm just going to put this all into a colander or a fine mesh sieve, run it under a cold water and constantly be tossing it with my fingers just for a minute or two, just to wash away any dirt that could be stuck between the layers. And I'll also be separating the layers with my fingers, so it'll all come away loose and the water will just wash away any dirt. Right, the next thing we want to do is chop up an onion. Last thing we want to do is just dice up our garlic. And there we have it, our minced garlic. Now we're ready to cook. So put a pan onto a medium heat, and once it's quite hot, put in our mushrooms. Now we want no oil in there or anything, just dry mushrooms straight into the pan. Spread them out so they can get some contact. And all we want to do is dry these mushrooms out, because that's just going to intensify their flavour. Just add a couple of pinches of salt to really help bring out those flavours. As you can see, the mushrooms release a lot of liquid, and we don't want this in our pie. You can see how they've shrunk. As we can see now, the liquid's almost gone, so the mushrooms have now dried, but now we want to give them colour, and that's really going to bring out the mushroom flavour. But we don't want that on a high heat, because it will really shrink the mushrooms down a lot. We want them to dry like dried fruit, I guess. Shriveled and dark coloured. So what we're going to do now is turn the heat right down, get one of our other rings going on a very low heat, almost at the very lowest, just a couple of points up from the very lowest setting, and we can move the pan over to that. And it's going to need another 10 minutes on a very low heat, just to intensify its flavours. Okay, now it's time to make our white sauce that's going to be in our chicken and mushroom pie. The way I'm going to make it is the way you would make any white sauce, any classic white sauce. It's not how you would make a chicken and mushroom sauce. Again, the traditional method is quite different, and although good, I don't think it's great, and this is going to be great. That's the point of it. The way I make it is exactly how you would make a bechamel, for example. So let's place close attention, because there is really only one way to make a luxury white sauce. I've seen so many other ways that people do it, and it's just not right, which leads to either something that's grainy or lumpy, or the flour isn't cooked out properly, and then it's just not very good. So we're going to add 25 grams of butter to the pan, and once it's melted, we can add 25 grams of flour. Okay, with our butter bubbling now, we want to add our 25 grams of flour. Once we've done that, we want to be whisking. It's going to clump up and become strange, but keep moving it, because we don't want it to burn. Show you what that looks like. Now what we want to do now is keep it on the heat so we can cook out the flour. Take a note of the smells. The initial smell that you get, that is not what cooked out would smell. Because I know we've all heard chefs say, cook out the flour. What does it mean? Well, what you're going to get once it's cooked out is a really strong biscuity aroma. And it takes a minute or two for that to start to happen. So that raw flour smell goes away. That's the initial smell that you get. And you'll start to get this really pleasant aroma. It's weak in the beginning, and that's where we're at now. I can smell it, but it's weak. But keep moving everything around. We don't want anything to sit and burn. Okay, now we're getting that strong biscuit-like aroma. And we want to do, another mistake that people do is they just then put all the milk straight in and start whisking. That will not create a luxury sauce. What you want is a splash. And mix it in immediately. And as soon as that's been absorbed, we want a splash. Now, I know this can seem time consuming, but it's what works. Once it's been absorbed, another splash. As you keep adding the milk and mixing, we're going to get to this kind of a consistency, paste, gluey almost consistency. Another way I should say it is, almost looks like mash that we've beaten far too much and it becomes like this. I'm sure we've all been there. Now we want to start adding a little bit more milk again. Now we can add a little more and just carefully stir that in, because if you're vigorous with it, it will just splash up at you. Just work it in. And once that's incorporated in, then you can be vigorous, and you need to be vigorous so that we don't form any lumps. We want to get back to having that kind of glue-like paste again. Once we've done that, add a little bit more milk. Slowly work it in so it doesn't splash up. And once it's been incorporated, then work it quite quickly. Look at that sauce. Look how shiny it looks. Look how creamy it looks. Now that is a perfect white sauce. Okay, once you get to the consistency that you want, we can stop. Now you don't need to add any salt or pepper to this, which you would normally make for a bechamel, because we're going to be mixing it in with all our other ingredients, and we'll be doing a salt and pepper test at that point. We don't want to over season. So for now, all we've got to do is put a lid on it so it doesn't form a skin, and just leave it to one side for when we're ready to use. So our mushrooms have just been sitting on a very low heat, drying out, and they are ready for us to use. So what we need to do now is get them out of this pan so that we can continue the cooking process. Okay, using the same pan on a heat between low and medium, we can now add our bacon. It's okay if the pan's a little cool. We're not trying to fry this bacon into crispy bits. We want it to render. We want this fat to just slowly dissolve out and create bacon grease. Okay, once our bacon has rendered and started to change color, we can now add a tablespoon's worth of butter. Just mix that around. And when the butter's foaming, as you can see, what we can do is add our diced onions. We're going to have to turn the heat up now because the onions are obviously cold, and we'll reduce the overall temperature. So let's go up to a medium-high. Now we don't want to brown these onions, we just want to soften. And to that we can add our leeks. What we want to do now is turn the heat down to just under medium, put the lid on, so that our onions and leeks can sweat. Now at this point we want to add chicken stock. Now I make my own batches of homemade chicken stock, which I then freeze in tubs. So I'm going to add a whole one here now. But if you don't have your own homemade chicken stock or frozen homemade chicken stock, then all you need to do is just add one stock cube, because stock cubes are far more concentrated than homemade stuff. And we're going to cover again and just let that continue to cook and soften. Okay, so for those who are using frozen homemade stock, once it's melted we can take the lid off and have a rapid boil, because we want to get rid of all this water, well, as much of it as we can, before we get to boiling. For those who are using a commercial cube, you're ahead of us. So that'll be the next part of the video. And add more ingredients. Technical difficulties, camera stopped, but we've added the chicken and now we're adding the mushrooms. Now we want 1 heaped teaspoon of mustard. I'm using Dijon because that's the one I prefer. If you want to stay true to the British Isles, then by all means use English mustard. Okay, so the final step is to add our bechamel white sauce. Just pour that straight in. All we want to do now is taste it. Taste it for salt, taste it for pepper. Let's give it a go. We need some salt for sure, and a few twists of black pepper. Put a lid on it, put it to one side and leave it. You want it to cool down before we make the pie. It doesn't have to cool all the way down, but we don't want it hot, that's for sure. If you're using store-bought pastry, or whether you've made your own, take it out of the fridge about 5 to 10 minutes before you want to use it. If you've got a particularly warm house or a warm kitchen, stick closer to the 5 minutes than the 10. This is the short crust pastry. It's the part we're going to do first. Okay. I'm going to be making my pies in these circular molds, but if you wanted to use just an ordinary rectangular dish, that's fine too. So get a dish not very big, because this isn't for a massive pie, and then you would line the bottom with this, crimp on the edges, and we'll use the other pastry for the top. It's exactly the same as I'm going to do with this. I'm going to line the bottom of these with the short crust, and then the top will be the puff pastry. So let's cut out the shapes that we need. Okay, so we take our molds, and all we're going to do is just a little bit of butter and just coat evenly all around the mold. Okay, so we've lifted the pastry and put it on a board so that we can cut out a shape. It doesn't have to be accurate or anything, just get a rough idea. So just put the mold over your pastry, find a corner somewhere that you can use so you're not wasting any space, and then just work around it. As long as your large, you know, what you're cutting is bigger than the actual mold, then that's fine. So we've got our first circular piece, and all we're going to do is work it into the bottom of our mold, just like that. What I do now is I take a finger into the water and I just wet the edge of the pastry, not the mold, that's got butter layer on it, but the pastry, because to that I'm going to stick the pastry that I want on the inside. Now we need to cut off the strip that we're going to use to go on the inside of the circumference of the pie mold. Just cut off a strip, just like that. We want to work it on the inside of our mold. All we have to do now is just cut off the edges. Not too much, because the pie will contract, so we need a little bit of excess when we blind bake it, but not a massive amount, just like that. There we go. It looks rough, but it's fine. Just like that. That's the late great Tommy Cooper used to say. Okay, so we've got our pastry into our molds. I'm also doing a traditional style pastry pie today as well. What I need to do now is blind bake. So we want to create a bit of a shell, a rigid shell. So we're going to cook it halfway, what they call blind baking. I've got my oven set at 160 degrees, that's Celsius, and we're going to need a few strips of greaseproof paper or baking paper. I don't know what you call it, everyone has different names for it. You've got this square sheet, square going into a circle, doesn't matter. Just get the paper in there, take your beads. Once we've got that full, push them down. We want them to take up every bit of space in there. We want it to push its way and keep the pastry shape. And there we have it, all three ready to go in the oven for about 20 minutes at 160 degrees. So while our pastry is blind baking, we can finish this off. This should now only be warm or even cool, which is how we want it. We don't want it. We didn't want to add it in hot to our pastry cases, our pie cases. But now we can also add the cheese. Now you can use cheddar cheese, or you can use red Leicester, like I am here. It's completely up to you. Just mix it in. So I've got about 150 grams of grated cheese here. I've probably used about 100 of it. And that'll be perfect, because that'll just melt when the pie has cooked. You have these beautiful melted cheese strands in the sauce. It'll just heighten the taste and the pleasure. Okay, with our blind bake finished, and we're going to let it just cool down a little bit. Remember, the beads are really hot, so we're just going to let it cool for a minute. We can start getting our puff pastry, or our rough puff pastries we have here, ready. Take it out of the fridge as well 10 minutes before you want to start using it. And if you've bought commercial puff pastry, same deal applies, 10 minutes before. Perfect. Let's get it on our board so that we can cut out our shapes. Let's just cut around that. And there we go, that's our first one. And all we need now is enough to cover the large one. What I'm going to do, to be honest, is just cut off these edges, because we're not going to use those clearly. And we'll just drape that over the whole thing, and we'll feather it in and cut off any excess. So our cases have been blind baked and they're ready to go. All we have to do now is fill them up with filling. Top with a little bit more cheese. Take our top, place it over the top of the pie, and then with our fingers just shape around carefully, gingerly. And with a little water on our fingers, we're just going to feather this down and squish it into the side of the pie. Make sure your fingers are wet. It won't stick otherwise. Okay, so once we've sealed the pastry onto the case, take one well-beaten egg and a brush, and we're just going to give it a light egg wash. There we go. Once we've done that, with a sharp pointy knife, just make a small hole in the top. Make sure it goes all the way through the pastry, and that's so that any steam while it's baking will escape. And now they're both ready to go into the oven. About 25 minutes, 30 minutes at the 160 Celsius that we were at should do it, but keep an eye on it. Look at it when it looks like the right colour, because everything else is cooked and the base is mostly cooked. It's all about the puff pastry. So if at 25 minutes it looks ready, don't go specifically because I said 30 minutes, do 30 minutes. You could come back and it's burnt. So keep an eye on it because everyone's ovens are different. So all we have to do now is cut it open and see what it looks like and see what it tastes like. Let's just do a whole cross section. I would never eat it like that, but just cut it right down the middle. And see what that looks like. Oh wow. Creamy and delicious, I'm sure. Let's take a bite. Let's cut a little piece off here. Oh, that puff, the rough puff is flaky. Just how we want it. Oh God. Hot, but so good. That rough puff is absolutely fantastic. Thin, light, flaky, and the short crust, God, biscuity, is so good. And the sauce inside, look at that, just creamy and delicious. One of the best chicken and mushroom pies I've had. Am I allowed to say that? Who knows? Anyway, as always, thank you for watching.